Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the June Space Association meeting for 2021 for the people in the room and also the people on Zoom. I'm not sure how many got there so far, but I think there's a few registered and coming on board. So thank you for coming. We managed to dodge a bullet this month. We had a Victorian lockdown in between our last meeting and this meeting, so we did well here. Yeah, we've got a big night tonight, so thank you for coming. I'll just progress this along. Where's that? So we'll get to this story, the picture in a moment, and you'll work out what's going on there. So once again, we've got quite a busy night tonight. We've got just a bit of news about the association for people that are familiar with us and also people who are members and want to know what's going on. Got a small roundup of Australian space news. There's a lot of news out there, but we're just giving you a highlight package here tonight, and we'll give you references of where to go and get further information if you need that. And then we've got our two special features, which I'm so excited about. We've got a presentation by the Andy Thomas Space Foundation at 7:30. We're going to start that. And that'll go for about a half an hour, and we'll have some time for Q&A hopefully in there, either at the end of that or later on in the evening. And then we're going to switch over to the University of Tasmania and their work involved in SpaceX and NASA missions that they've been doing down there for quite some time. It's quite a revelation. I picked this up when I was watching one of the SpaceX launches a couple of months ago, and they said, we're picking him up in Tasmania now, and I went, what? So that started me on a hunt, so quite a bad story. And then we're going to take a break for about a half an hour, about 8:35, and you can get have a stretch, have to say hello to someone you haven't met before and have a chat. And then we've got our global space news roundup with Angelo Dugatti. Is he here? He'll be here shortly. And that's something not to miss. And then we're going to be thrown out at about 9:30, so something like that. A couple of things people may or may not be aware. A couple of months ago, we had a special event and we showed this film, Searching for Skylab. Amazing film, quite unique. We've got copies of the Blu-ray here for sale if you're interested, and they're $35 per copy, and we can take cash or credit card payments if you're interested in those. They're pretty hard to get. We've only got, I think we've got 6 left, 4 left, 5 left. So come and look at those up here. And we've also got the Australia in Space book, which was released in 2019 for the 50th anniversary of Apollo 11 by Australian historian, and she was formerly the curator of the space section at the Powerhouse Museum in Sydney, Kerry Doherty. And that was put out by the Space Industry Association of Australia. So that's the comprehensive history of Australian space. So it's a beautiful book, and I've got a couple of copies up here. You can have a look at that if you wish. We've also got a night out in Williamstown voucher we had someone express interest. I haven't confirmed that yet, so if it's still available, if someone's interested in having a night out at the Quest in Williamstown, we've got that available for purchase. We just have to use it by the 18th of October, so we're pretty flexible on what you pay for that. So all offers will be considered. Take the significant other, or as Russell Crowe said in Master Commander, to our wives and sweethearts, may they never meet. Okay, and for those people not familiar, we at the Space Association, we're a non-profit group. We're publicly run by volunteers. No one gets paid, so we basically survive on our subscriptions, membership subscriptions. So if you like what we do and you're interested in keeping us going, we'd love for you to consider joining up. And you can see Tim or the other people here and get yourself involved in that. So for those people who are not familiar, we do have monthly meetings. The fourth Monday of the month is the general formula, apart from December, because obviously the fourth Monday of December is a crazy time. So obviously we're here tonight. The next meeting will be the 26th of July, Monday the 26th. And so we look forward to seeing you there. Once again, if you like what we do tonight, come along again, bring some friends. And we also live stream this meeting on YouTube and also Zoom. So you can get involved in all that. So we have people watching this from around the country, and we get a few people watching the replays on YouTube from around the world, which is nice to see. So I put this slide up for next month. Theoretically, one or both of these guys are going to be taking a suborbital flight on their Blue Origin or Virgin Galactic vehicles. So it'll be interesting to see who gets up there and who gets back, more importantly, and who gets there first. So watch this space. So hopefully our next meeting will have a full report on what happened. Both coming back. That's the advertised plan anyway, yes.
They can't not come back.
Well, they might come back, just depends how fast and how well they land. Gravity kind of like that. All right, so just a quick roundup of Australian space news. This is me and my former newsreader guys. When I had hair, that's it, yeah. So the Australian Space Agency are hiring. So if you're looking for a new position or new challenge, they're looking for a couple of positions to create the keep the agency going. A General Manager of Office of Space Regulator and General Manager of Strategy and Industry Growth. So obviously these are two focuses of the agency itself. Lots of their new positions or positions that are being replaced by somebody else, I don't know. This is a description of what they're looking for. I believe they'll both be based in South Australia, where the head of the agency is. And no, it's not like an episode of Utopia, I don't think. Anyway, some other Australian space news. Southern Launch, Friends of the Association, we've had them on actually a couple of times now presenting their activities. So they've received approval to construct the infrastructure necessary to support a test launch campaign at the tip of the Eyre Peninsula. So this is a full operating base for them. It's basically tests to get themselves going. So the South Australian State Commission and assessment panels granted them approval. There had been some opposition from various people in relation to the environmental impact, etc., but their plan is to have a temporary rocket range on already cleared land, so they're not going to have a huge impact on the environment. And they're basically going to gather data, just have noise and vibration modelling for the site, according to the press release that they've sent out. So they're going to have roughly 10-metre tall rockets carrying a minimal payload. This would then be potentially lead to approval of the Whalers Wave Orbital Launch Complex, which hopefully will send more satellites to orbit. So we had a pretty good report on them last month, I think, or the month before. So they set out these three conditions, ensuring there's only 3 launches will occur from the site, no infrastructure will be ruined or changed, the launch pad will be built upon cleared land to avoid native vegetation removal. The approval did have 277 submissions and 88 were in opposition, which you'd expect, fair enough, why not? So the opposition are from National Trust, Birds SA, etc. So they're committed to working closely with the Department of Environment and Water to ensure that PAD won't have detrimental impacts on flora and fauna. So obviously we're all interested in doing that. So good on them, keep going. Australian Space Agency awards 2 more Moon to Mars grants. 850,000 have both been awarded to small Queensland electronics manufacturer and a South Australian nanosec company. So Crystal Aid Manufacturer, high-tech electronics manufacturer from Queensland, and Fleet Space Technologies. Fleet Space have been very active, and we'll hear more about them shortly. So they're a nanosec company in South Australia. That's part of this Moon to Mars supply chain capability improvement grant.
Do you know what Crystal Aid made?
The next slide has a little bit of information on it, Len. I'll just move across to there. So, Crystal Aid, high-end electronics manufacturer at Brisbane, modernised their vacuum oven technology at this stage, so used to separate and remove moisture from components without exposing them to extreme heat. So I'm not quite certain. Obviously, high-end electronics is what they're about in this vacuum chamber, or the vacuum oven is key to their plans going forward. And
Crystal Aid is a contract electronic manufacturer, so if you've got something you want assembled, they assemble it for you. It's a scam, actually.
A scam, is it?
Well, how much space? this doesn't imply they're going to make anything in space.
Just provide facilities to
They've got some free, so
to
they
test.
buy some new high-tech stuff for their own production line.
Is that right?
Yeah, it's great if you can get it.
Just for anyone watching or listening to this recording, the views expressed by the people in this room do not reflect those of the Association of Australia, and we take no responsibility. I'll send you his name and address later on. And Fleet Space Technology Nanosat Company, so they received a grant of $386,000 to help the company and its partners, SAA Power Networks and Oz Minerals, demonstrate the viability of its agnostic hybrid satellite low-powered wide area network (LPWAN) system for development of remote Internet of Things applications, both on Earth and in space. I don't pretend to know exactly what that is all about, but it sounds fascinating. So they'll collaborate to miniaturise and ruggedise sensors for the use of satellites in that system and illustrate terrestrial application of space technology and hardware that can be extended to the Moon Mars initiative. So more news on, I don't know why is it 4 bit. Okay, Fleet Space Technologies, they're going to be launching their 6th small sat, Century 4, aboard Falcon 9. At this stage, it's scheduled for Wednesday morning. It was supposed to be on Saturday morning, but they've had a postponement there. So it'll deliver to a 450-kilometre orbit. It's a shoebox-sized satellite. A major achievement of the company to incorporate the tech of a small sat payload. Due to this craft's power and volume constraints, this will allow for substantial increases throughout throughput for customer data. So they seem to be very active. The Century 4 will implement the first 3D printed antenna system, which sounds interesting. And that's a picture of it there. So apparently this system is, I don't know how that integrates with that particular satellite, but it's just a new design, 3D printed. So watch this space. They seem to be doing quite well over there down the fleet. We should try and get them on one of our meetings in the future at some stage. So yeah, once again, that launch will be scheduled at this point on Wednesday morning at 4:56 AM. So we expect every member to be up, dressed and in formal spacewear to watch that. There'll be a test later on. So Space Data Facility opens access to future innovators. The Australian Space Data Analysis Facility, ASDAF, has been established to assist Australian small and medium enterprises, researchers, etc., enhancing their ability to leverage space data. So basically, the ASDAF is in Western Australia, opened in late May, and giving access to satellite data sets as well as providing training and tools to analyse the data. Centre is aimed at small businesses to gain valuable access to infrastructure. So there's a lot going on. I mean, as I say, I picked and stripped down a lot of the things that were out there that were going on this month. So it's a partnership between Pawsey Supercomputer Centre and with the Western Australia Data Science Innovation Hub. So you can go to that website and have a look at all that. That's quite interesting. And also they're calling for expressions of interest for relevant projects from SMEs and researchers. So if you know someone that might be interested in taking up some of this capability, get onto it. The EOI submissions across 4 programs of work: access to data and tools, specialised data analytics, training capacity building, and knowledge sharing and collaboration. So it's got federal and state government support, developing infrastructure to provide support and services to small and medium enterprises. The second Australian Space Awards were given out, and I'm not going to read all of these out, but you might see some names you're familiar with there. University of Western Australia, Sasha Shawandi, whatever it is, Engineer of the Year, Executive of the Year, Female Leader of the Year, Professor Hannah Moore, Graduate of the Year, Clint Tharakem from Canberra, Innovator of the Year, Blake Nikolic from Black Sky Aerospace, Researcher, Rising Star, Christopher Capon. I don't see anyone from Victoria here. We've got to fix that next year. And also the group categories: Business of the Year, Innovative of the Year, Research Organisation, Space Education Outreach Program, CUAVA. I went to write what this acronym. It's basically a small set education group. They basically help students and people learn about how to build and operate small sets. So good on them for doing that. Started to use Prism Euro. And more South Australian news. They pledged $6.6 million for low Earth orbit satellite. This SASAT-1 mission, announced earlier this year, will see state government partner with local industry to improve services such as emergency services, the environment, water, etc., etc. So their SmartSat Cooperative Research Centre will lead the mission, and I believe it's going to be delivered this satellite in 15 months. It didn't say anything about how or where it's going to be launched. I suspect it won't be in Australia, but the satellite's supposed to be up there for 3 years until 2024. And it will support data collection, ground-based sensors, plus Earth observation imaging, like hyperspectral electro-optical payload. Now, we mentioned this last month, but we thought I'd throw it back in here again. In Western Australia, Carnarvon Space Festival is on Saturday, July 31. For people that aren't aware, there's a Carnarvon Space Museum there. Carnarvon used to be quite an active NASA facility for low Earth orbit tracking and communications. The museum now is there. It's got a lot of facilities that were there or nearby. It's been moved there. It's had quite a lot of support from local government and state government, and the museum is quite active, all run by volunteers. And they're building this one-to-one lunar module replica. So, and they're aiming to launch that. So there is Carnarvon over there on that map on the bottom left-hand side. So quite away from Victoria. So I think you need to fly to Perth and then fly up from there or drive up from there. I think a couple of members in West Australia are driving up from Perth. I think it's a kind of an 8-hour drive. So well worth going apparently. So here's a few of the in-progress pictures of the construction of this lunar module. Apparently you're going to be able to walk up and stand in it and look out the windows like the astronauts would have seen the moon, so that'll be quite experienced. So I might have to try and get over there one day. All right, Mike, do you know if we've got our speakers on the board? Okay, so that's enough from me with the news and the Space Association information. Obviously, if you're interested in joining up or being part of what we do, there's a sheet of paper there. You can write your name and email and phone number, address, and phone number, etc., and put your name there and come onto our database. So we've now got our two special guests for our first presentation from the Andy Thomas Foundation. It's Professor Nicola Sasanelli and Michael Davis, who's the chair, and their presentation is Human Progress in Space Exploration. Ashley, I believe we're going to switch over to these presenters now. I'm not sure how to do that. We'll get our IT guy. I believe so, yeah.
Just give me a moment.
Good evening, everyone. It's Michael Davis speaking from Adelaide, and I'd like to thank Peter and all the members of the Space Association of Australia for your very kind invitation. What I propose to do is to introduce my colleague and our Chief Executive Officer, Nicola Sasanelli. Nicola, I think you've got the old version of the slides. Would you like me to show the new version? I think I can do that from my desktop. Just bear with me. Are you able to see my desktop, my slides? I'll assume you are. Yes, I've got a thumbs up, so that's okay. We could, Nicola, we can use my slides, and you can tell me when to change them. So what I'd like to do very quickly is to introduce my colleague and our Chief Executive Officer, Nicola Sasanelli. We've known each other, and we've been very good friends for over 5 years. Nicola came to Australia as science attaché for the government of Italy, working in the Italian embassy in Canberra. And after achieving some wonderful things on behalf of the Italian government, he decided to change sides, and he moved to South Australia, to Adelaide, and was employed by the South Australian government, working on industry development and international relations. And after a few years, he became involved in the space sector in South Australia, and has some marvelous achievements to under his belt, including the establishment of the decision of the South Australian government to establish the South Australian Space Industry Centre, which was a decision made in the lead up to the International Astronautical Congress in Adelaide in 2017. And so it was the first state government to see the importance of developing the Australian space industry at state level. And the South Australian government, I believe, has sort of shown the way to the other state governments in Australia, and in some senses also to the Commonwealth government. After the announcement of the establishment of the Australian Space Agency at the IAC in September 2017, Nicola embarked upon a new project, which was a bid to establish the SmartSat Cooperative Research Centre. And with the assistance of many players throughout Australia, that bid was ultimately successful, and then he was seconded to work part-time for the Cooperative Research Centre. But not being satisfied with those achievements, he also initiated the idea of a foundation to support space education and outreach in Australia. And we're now very fortunate that he is also seconded by the South Australian government part-time to be our Chief Executive Officer. So I think that's probably all I need to say about Nicola, but I'd like to introduce him to tell you a little bit more about our foundation.
Oh, thank you, Michael. And yeah, what you say is not just related to me, but in all of this journey, you were with me. So, and we start to work together in 2015 when you and your team were able to bring the International Astronautical Conference 2017 here in Adelaide. So that was the moment where the South Australian government started to think about to have an office dedicated to the space. And then, of course, have here the Space Agency in Australia, as well the SmartSat CRC, and Dulcis in Fundo, the Andy Thomas Foundation is part of our work. We spend a lot of time together, coffee, and Saturday and Sunday to write a report and write proposal. But anyway, we are here, and thanks to invite us to present the Andy Thomas Foundation. This idea has come a couple years ago. The foundation has been established in July last year, 2020. So in 2 days we can celebrate 1 year. And but of course we started 1 year before than this, and there was, in the space environment, we start to think about how it's important to keep high the number of students that decide to choose STEM subjects. So, and that is, everybody's know how the technology-led economy, knowledge economy needs skilled people. Big data, Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, is just some example that is related to space, but is create a demand of student with a technological skill. STEM skills job are growing at, for what the statistic reported, 1.5 times faster than any other job. So this is why it is so important to consider space as a sort of a vehicle or tools to promote STEM in the school. And that is easy to think because space, everybody, when we talk about space, we talk about inspiration. So space has unusual power to inspire young kids, but also adult or people like us. So of course, in the last period of time, Elon Musk and SpaceX, Brandon's Ellingsen, so all of these people, they start to entry in our day-by-day life, and think about them as a sort of hero. And we start to think about we need to do something. So as Michael said before, in 2018, the Australian Space Agency was established, and we were at the back of this. In 2019, the Smart CRC was established, and then we start to think about with Michael, okay, we have a national organization that take care about the regulation and the developed Australian commercial space industry. Then we have the Smart CRC that take care about R&D, so research and development in this country. So we need an organization, national organization, that have to take care about the outreach and education in the space sector, but education in general. So our background, we started, as you said before, we established as a charitable cooperation in 2020, governed by a board of directors, funded by grants, donation, fundraising events, and of course the deductible gift register status approved in Parliament in June 2021. We are inspired by two important people that we consider very close to our foundation, and we give them the rule of patron. Patron means people that can take care of us, for us as a sort of mentor. We talk and share idea and also networking. And of course, Dr. Andy Thomas and Dr. Megan Clark. So what we have in mind, why we established this? Because of course we have a big vision. A vision is to support, to help the building of this space ecosystem in Australia, and to drive the progress in education, research, and innovation. That is our big vision. That is in some way is is embedded in the South Australian space ecosystem system. Mission is to promote social well-being and overcome disadvantage in Australia, and advocate in favor of space as a domain, as international cooperation for space fuel ecosystems. But at the same time, it is also to support the space education and outreach, and of course to inspire young people to pursue the career not only in space but also, in particular, to choose a STEM subject. So the purpose, and then is come with the implementation as a three important purpose. One is advanced space education, then is raising space awareness, and then contribute to the national space community. These three elements are very, very important, then become for us a sort of pillar, no, that is considered for us strategic. And that is why from the day one, when we established this foundation, we already have the strategy, and we start already to orient our effort in these three directions. One is advanced space education. What does it mean? It means support education in all the spectrum of the age, from the primary school to postgraduate, post-PhD student. And then we can do this with some education fund, as well as support the Australian Discovery Centre. That is an important pillar for us. And we will see that we already, in the next slide, we already implemented more than 200,000 Australian dollar the first year in the first 6 program. The second pillar is raising space awareness and outreach. What does mean this? Is stay with the community. Bringing space to the community, talk with them, and that is not just the young generation. Michael and myself, we have a frequent presentation to the Rotary, Lions, and also to the Discovery Center. We bring kids. When we has established this education fund, it's not just a program for the school, but we would like to be involved with the school. We would like to involve the teacher. We would like to involve the parent. So not only a new generation. The third important element is contributing to the national space community and innovation. What does mean this? Means not do what SmartSat CRC is doing, so promote R&D through project. But what we are doing, and we do this also before the establish of this foundation, is create event. So we have the Australian Space Forum. Is the next one will be the 15th of September. Will be the 12th. So is a 6 year, every 6 months we have this forum. And of course we would like to stay close to our Discovery Center as well as the education. So try to create a sort of networking events where all the ecosystem is in some way involved. We already talked about this education fund. I just want to give you an example. We are already allocated the first year 215,000 Australian dollar, and that we have 6 plus 1 that will be announced in the couple days. So 7 programs. The first program is a program with our company that is sponsor the Andy Thomas Foundation, that is the EOS space system in Canberra. So they do mainly optical communication. So we establish an award with 3 prize that is dedicated to Australian researchers or doctor candidate for the best research project proposal in these specific fields. There are many fields is already reported in the program, in the call. So what we would like to do is researchers that has some idea or some application towards this area, so we can give them $10,000 if the idea is allow the US to think about this potential new project. The second program is we support the Southern Hemisphere Space Study Program. As you know, this is an important undergraduate and postgraduate program that is done by the ESU, the International Space University, and the University of South Australia. We support one scholarship at the moment, full scholarship for a candidate, an Australian candidate. As the program one, this is for everybody in Australia. It's not just limited to South Australia. The third program is 3 scholarship for students that intended to attend an honors or master program in the space-related field. It's very important because we are involved also in the Smart SAA-CRC, and Smart SAA-CRC are able to provide 74 PhD full scholarship around the 7 years of life. But often we are not able to find some post-bachelor quite mature to be involved in some PhD program. So what we try to do is offer some honors or master just to, fix this gap, about bachelor and PhD student. The program 4 is more oriented to internship. So we are involved with the Spirit, University of Melbourne, and the Spirit is one of the projects was funded by the Australian Space Agency. Is a CubeSat 6U led by Melbourne University with many companies like CETA, Innovor, and Human Space. So what we will do is 5 awards, $6,000 each to support this internship to students that intend to spend some time in this industry. The program number 5 is we give a prize, 9 prize of $5,000 each to 9 schools in South Australia. This program is full supported by South Australian government. So what we would like to do is, in particular, working with the student and teacher in year 7 and 8 and 9, and raise the importance of space in the United Nations Sustainable Development Goal, the 17 goals that we found a strong interest as the space-based technology can help to solve this goal. So the next one is instead is again 6 schools in South Australia, because this program is completely supported the South Australian government, and that is a sort of professional development for 25 teachers in 9 different South Australian primary schools. So also in this case, not only teacher, but for example, we ask not only student but also teachers. So we ask the teacher to come to the Discovery Center, stay with us with the company that is quite mature in the last 2-3 years in established courses like this is Maker Empires, and work with these learning by design courses. It's quite important because we found in the last year that is not just stimulate the student but also stimulate the teacher that are interested to be involved in this activity. And the next one will be published at the end of this week or probably Thursday. That is a very interesting program. Also in this case, I would like to avoid to touch this topic, but we used to say stay in tune, and and the next 2 days there are media release related to this 7th program. So at the end of this story, the story is we would like to find partners. So partners that can share with us common value, the power education, pursuing excellence, and diversity inclusion. That is the 3 important value that we would like to share with our partners. So what does mean this? For example, we are looking for company, not only company involved in the space sector, but company that enjoy or in their value is there is to stimulate more people, more students, more young students to choose the STEM subject. Also government, if state government would like to implement some program for school, primary or high school, more than happy to do the same thing that we did with our pilot project in South Australia to do this. Actually, we are working with New South Wales government. We're already involved in cost per kind kids in Sydney. The next big event for us is the forum on the 15th of September, and I thanks you to allow me to use this platform to promote this event. There are 3 important topics that will be discussed in September. One is moving from CubeSat to larger satellites. It's very important topic. Many organizations, including university, they are talking about CubeSat, easy, everybody then do this, but the next step is more satellites, 100 kilo, 200 kilo. So what is the gap? We have international guests and of course national guests that is talk about this. Then the second panel is related to Earth observation. So EO technology for space-based application. There was a fantastic report that was published a couple months ago from, I think I knew, was very interesting to understand how is important this economy to growing for the space. We will discuss about this. And the last one is on Earth, off Earth, remote operation. Autonomous vehicles is very important, and it's very important to start to use this space-based technology on the Earth, in the mining industry and logistic transport, and then maybe move this on the Moon, on the Mars. So I strongly recommended to be involved, attend this forum, because last one was more than 1,100 people registered, and that is including the 2 components, the virtual component and face-to-face. But what was really amazing was the exhibition area with 65 exhibitors, so it was fantastic, the biggest in Australia. Across the finger with this pandemic, with the COVID, across the finger that we can improve this number. That is all for me, and more than happy to answer your question. Michael and myself are here to share with you what we did and what we would like to do.
Thank you, Michael and Nicola. It was fascinating. And just for the people in the room here in Melbourne, if you do want to ask a question, you'll have to come up here and ask through the microphone here. The people on Zoom, if you put your hand up, I think actually will switch you over. But at this stage, we'll go with questions in the room. Has anyone got anything they would like to ask? I've got one question. The Australian Space Forum, that's been running for a number of years. Who was the predecessor before the Andy Thomas Foundation running that?
It was the South Australian government, and it was our idea. So we started the first forum in April 2016 with 80 attendees, and I was there. I was the facilitator. Michael was next to me. So we bring this as our baby. The forum is an important element in this growing ecosystem. With some others like the council, the Space Council, like also the a sort of register where all the organizations are included, and then easy to create activity among the ecosystem, but also is easy to sell, internationally the ecosystem. Yeah.
Excellent. Obviously, a number of universities and institutions around Australia have aerospace and space-related courses and qualifications. Is there any sort of coordinated, I don't know, space technology degrees or qualifications that you're looking to try and unify across the country? Is that something? Does that make kind of sense? Like to have a qualification like that to be implemented or established?
It's a wonderful idea, Peter, but I don't know if you've ever been involved in trying to get universities to collaborate.
Collaborating in COVID, is that right? Yeah.
That's right. So I suspect that most of the undergraduate teaching will continue to be in the engineering and science disciplines. And there are some aerospace engineering undergraduate degrees. But in order to actually get established in the industry, postgraduate study and even work overseas is the typical career pattern. And one of the programs that I've been involved in for the last 12 years in Australia is the Southern Hemisphere Space Studies program, which is a short, intensive professional development program for graduates from any discipline. So we bring together the engineers, lawyers, scientists, doctors, military officers, etc., etc. And that type of conversion or professional development course, we think it plays an important role in helping people establish the networks that they need, and also giving them a slightly bigger picture than what they might have studied in their own undergraduate study, given that space is very interdisciplinary, and you can, there are experts and leaders in this industry globally who come from many different backgrounds. And so one of the things that I think as a foundation will continue to promote is the idea of bringing in people from as many different backgrounds as possible, including graduates and people who might be interested in going on and doing advanced research. And as Nicola said, there are many opportunities for PhD research in space, but it's hard to find the candidates with the right academic background.
And if I can say one more, on top of this, what Michael said, the space is a new topic, and it is not easy to find. Also, for who manage the university, the right courses in order to fill, 20, 30 students in that courses. So, what we did as a SmartSat CRC is this skill gap analysis. Is a report that was done with some colleagues in Sydney, and in these 360 skills that we identified, you can see what is the gap. And the next step for this report is to do something more with more diligence in a particular area, and that will be the future. So you need to identify what is the gap and then organize courses. But this is quite new because we can say this sector in Australia is quite new. Also, if in the 1945, 1946, Woomera, everybody was involved in that. But for many, many years, nobody take care about space in Australia. So what's happened in the last 5 years is really, really extraordinary. And then it's quite quickly, and we need to in some way follow with the rationality,
Oh, I know that just off the top of my head, I think Sabre Astronautics and Fleet Aerospace have offered like cadetships in the past. Is that something that you're involved in, encouraging, helping to facilitate? Is that an area that you're involved with or will be involved in? The cadetships that they've been doing?
Internships, certainly, Peter. And the Melbourne University Spirit program that Nicola briefly mentioned is an internship opportunity next summer in the long university vacation for, I think, 2 months. And we're helping to provide the funding or the stipends that the young graduates or senior undergraduates will receive. Cadetships, I'm not so sure about. There may be, there are all sorts of ways that companies are trying to attract bright young graduates, but the main strategy that we've observed is the idea of getting students in before they graduate to give them some hands-on experience, helping design or build a CubeSat, for example, and then hopefully through that they get offered a full-time job as soon as they graduate. And my impression is that the opportunities for engineering graduates in particular who are interested in working in satellites are really booming. There are lots of opportunities opening up in all of these companies that are now moving from startups to sort of small to medium size companies.
Fantastic. Okay, so we've got a couple of questions coming in from interstate. One's from Julian Timmers, who's over in Western Australia. Go ahead, Julian.
Yeah, good evening. Both to Michael and Nicola, a great presentation. Now, you mentioned academics suitable for STEMs and space industries, but how would you go looking at, say, apprenticeships, or rather than an academic, you still need people to build, say, an actual CubeSat or put the raw materials together, fabrication, stuff like that. Would STEMs and the scholarship stuff cover that?
Certainly the school level programs that we've launched would be designed to encourage students at school to develop technical skills. And for example, the Makers Empire program we've just announced involves designing solutions to space-related problems and then producing the design with 3D printers. And so I suspect that in the future we'll need more and more young technicians who are able to use 3D printing or as one of their main tools. So that's an example of, yes, one of the programs that we're actively promoting that won't necessarily be directed toward people, having university careers, but maybe having technical careers.
Yeah, because I've got a young bloke here. He's starting to think, he's in middle high school. He's thinking, okay, what do I want to do with my life? I said, yeah, you got your traditional trades, like your plumber, electrician, woodworker, stuff like that. But, I'm trying to find information to try and steer him more in future jobs and future technology.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think I think that's where space and new techniques and new applications are important, because of, you know, when you're being trained in a particular technical field, you really can't predict where you will end up or what industry you'll be working in. But what you need is a set of skills that can be translated into various industries.
Yeah.
Thanks, Julian.
No worries. Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. We'll head over to Michael G. I'm not sure if Michael is.
Yes, hi. I've just got a question. It seems like there's a lot of impetus to try to bring people into the space industry. As you said, graduates, even introducing things at the school level. I'm just curious, what kind of, if there's a particular kind of candidate that you're looking for in terms of you just don't have enough of, what would be, say, the top 2 or 3 specialties or types of candidates that you're really seeking over others, if you would be able to make that assessment?
I think that you need to follow where are the interests of some Australian company now. So in particular in South Australia, we have in the last 5 years, Scale Up, that is Grow Up, and then the Scale Up and SME. Innovor technology is able to manufacturing the CubeSat, not only the bus, but all the electronics. So in that case, you need an electronic engineer, but it is also aerodynamic. You need also mechanical engineering to structure the bus. Then we have, for example, 2 important companies, Mariota and Fleet. They start to do Internet of Things, so a lot of software, communication, ground station. But now, for example, Fleet is start to consider also more the engineering aspect of the bus too. And then you have cybersecurity, artificial intelligence, digital twin, that is more software. So the question is, what is the future of the space in Australia in order to orient, our student and choose discipline. But as Michael said before, the space is a multidisciplinary. We need expert in physics, in chemistry, and also expert in law. The space law is another important component, but we need also space in medicine, because when you have the microgravity upstairs, your body is completely changed. So, space is quite interesting, but if my son or my daughter have to ask me, Dad, what I have to do in order to be ready in 3-4 years, my answer is the market is now follow this company. Mariota, Fleet, and Innovor, they were 2-3 people 3-4 years ago. Now they have around 50 employees each. So it's incredible. And if you go there, you can see from the electronics to the mechanical to all of these subjects are really important for the space.
Fantastic.
It makes sense? This is answer your question?
It does make sense. It does make sense, yes.
Well,
Thank you.
Thank you, Michael and Nicola. Really appreciate that. It's just giving us a small sample of what you're doing there. We'd love to keep in touch with you and see what you're doing. We're going to finish up now and move on to the next presenter. Gentlemen, you're more than welcome to stay on and watch the rest of the presentation. And if you're interested, we've got a break in the centre. People might want to ask you more questions if you're willing and able to stay around. But thanks very much. We really appreciate you being on. Thank you.
Oh.
Thank you.
Thank you. It was a great pleasure. And a great pleasure to catch up with you again after so many years, Peter.
That's right. We can swap hairstyle.
Yes, absolutely.
Not you, Nicola. All right.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you. All right. I'm assuming that Professor Simon Ellingsen is online now, and he's the Professor of Physics and Radio Astronomy and Dean of School of Natural Sciences at the University of Tasmania. And Simon is going to give us a presentation on their activities down there related to SpaceX tracking and other things, and also NASA missions. So I will go ahead and mute my microphone here and hand over to you, Simon, if you're ready to go.
Yep. Thank you, Peter. And thank you for the invitation to tell you a bit tonight about what we're doing at the University of Tasmania in the way of space. So I'm going to apologise first off if the quality of my camera is a bit poor. My laptop decided to die last week and I'm back on one that's a few years older and it's a little lacking in some of its features. But hopefully it will all be okay. So what I'm going to do now is share my screen. Oops. Let's try that one. Okay. So I hope everyone can see the presentation. Just give me a yell if there's a problem with that. So yeah, just to introduce myself first, I'm Simon Ellingsen. I'm the Dean of Natural Sciences at the University of Tasmania. And when I'm not having fun administering a large number of staff, I like to spend my time working in mainly astronomy, but more recently a lot in space and space science as well. So I'd like to give you a bit of an overview today of a whole range of things that we're doing in space at the University of Tasmania, beyond space tracking and that sort of stuff, although I know that's of a particular interest to this group. So where are we? Sorry, I'm just trying to get my presentation to do what it's supposed to do and move to the next slide. Where is it? So, as I'm sure this group is well aware, space is a lot more than astronauts and rockets, and we just heard some discussion just then about the construction of satellites and all of that sort of thing. But I guess I just wanted to point out in this slide, the overall space industry several years ago was estimated at something like $344 billion. And the crewed spaceflight bit is a tiny little brown sliver just here at about So there's a lot of stuff going on in space beyond rockets and also beyond satellites and things like that. And I'll talk a little bit about some of that later as well. So space is everywhere around us. During lockdown last year, one of the things I did to entertain myself was play a bit of Animal Crossing. And I was somewhat amused to discover that you could buy yourself a parabolic tracking antenna even in Animal Crossing. So space is really getting everywhere. And Tasmania has a long history and a long association with space in all sorts of different ways. So one of the things Tasmania is well known for is the aurora. It's one of the highest latitude places where you can relatively easily see aurora, and especially during times when we have a solar maximum, we get quite a few people who visit Tasmania just to see the aurora, which are relatively speaking easy to see here. Now, interestingly enough, the fact that Tasmania is a good place for seeing aurora actually relates to our involvement in space in a larger sense as well. And so essentially the reason that Tasmania is a good place for seeing aurora is that it's close to the magnetic pole. It's much closer to the magnetic poles than it is to the physical poles. And so what that means is that, one, you can see more aurora, but it also has an impact on the ionosphere. So the ionosphere over Tasmania is actually thinner than it is at most places over the Earth. And essentially that, again, relates to the magnetic field, because the magnetic field affects the ionosphere. And so what you can see in this plot here, it shows the dip pole, the location where the magnetic field is vertical at the Earth's surface. And you can see that the dip pole is down here south of Tasmania. So even other parts of the southern hemisphere, which are at similar latitudes of about -40 odd, are not as well placed in terms of things like aurora and also the ionosphere. The ionosphere, of course, is important for a whole range of reasons, but if you're an astronomer, the ionosphere is something that can create issues with observations at very low frequencies. Essentially, the same properties of the ionosphere, which mean that it's good for shortwave radio, means that it blocks out signals from outer space. And the study of space in Tasmania really started in the 30s, the 40s and the 50s. Some of it was in cosmic ray related work, which I'm not going to talk about here, but again, that has is influenced by the magnetic properties of the Earth. And the other is in very low frequency radio astronomy. So radio astronomy in Tasmania commenced in the 50s, and Bill Ellis was the main driver of that at the University of Tasmania. And interestingly enough, the person who made the very first astronomical observations of space at radio wavelengths, Grote Reber, moved to Tasmania in the early 1960s after visiting in the 50s, basically because of the unique ionospheric properties in Tasmania, which meant that during solar minimum, it was possible on cold winter nights to make observations at lower frequencies from Tasmania than any other essentially accessible part of the world. So to get similar properties, you have to go to very far northern Canada, which is even less hospitable than the middle of Tasmania in the middle of winter. So we see here some pictures of Bill Ellis and some students at the University of Tasmania, and also a picture of Grote Reber here addressing the Astronomical Society of Tasmania. And if any of you are interested in this early low frequency work, Martin George of the QV Mag in Launceston, or recently of there, has written a very nice series of papers in the Journal of Astronomical History and Heritage, which goes through the details and the long history of this. So I won't go into any of the details in terms of why Tasmania
Well, we've got these break. The kitchen closes at 8:15. If you want to have a last minute order. It's the ionosphere.
Sunspots on the whole, but it's the same as
You want to hear it, Willie? We'll pause for a commercial break. Hopefully his connection comes back. Oh, okay, I'm back online. Beautiful. Thanks, Simon. And back to you.
Sorry about that. I'm not quite sure where I was up to when you lost me. The work that was being done in low frequency astronomy in the 50s, 60s and 70s essentially established a reputation for the University of Tasmania in the radio astronomy work. And in the 1980s, we were fortunate enough to have an antenna donated to us from Aurora Valley. Oh, sorry, I'll need to share again. Sorry about that. Just let me. Okay. Hopefully that's now come back where it should be. So in the 1980s, NASA was rationalizing its spacecraft tracking operations around the globe. And I'm sure this group here is familiar that there was some antennas at Honeysuckle Creek and at Aurora Valley, both of which were near Canberra. I think there was an antenna at Honeysuckle Creek which was scrapped, and that caused quite a bit of controversy. And so a few years later, when the Aurora Valley station was shut down, NASA decided that it didn't need to have bad publicity twice, and so it decided to donate one of the antennas from the Aurora Valley site to the University of Tasmania. So this is the 26-metre antenna we can see in the background here. So at Aurora Valley, this antenna was part of NASA's STDN, Space Tracking and Data Acquisition Network, and it had the primary job of tracking unmanned scientific satellites. So it did participate in a number of famous crewed missions, a 1975 Apollo-Soyuz mission, and it also supported some of the early space shuttle missions in the early 80s. But essentially, NASA rationalised its deep space network, or a spacecraft tracking in Australia, to the Tidbinbilla site, and this antenna at that time was identified as being surplus to their requirements. So it was taken to pieces, put onto low loaders, moved to Tasmania, and it was reconstructed during 1985 and 1986. And the arrival of this 26-metre antenna and its installation at the observatory, not far from the Hobart Airport, at Mount Pleasant Observatory, is probably the biggest single contributor to Tasmania's involvement in spacecraft tracking. So it's been involved in a large number of different types of experiments over the years. So I'm going to focus on what it has been involved with here at the University of Tasmania. So at the University of Tasmania, one of the first missions that I was aware of that it was working on was a mission called IMP-8, or also known as Explorer 50. So this was a satellite which was launched back in 1973, and it was the last in a series of satellites used to monitor the Earth's sun environment. So between 1991 and 2001, the Mount Pleasant 26-metre was one of a number of sites worldwide which supported this mission. So the NASA support for this mission ceased in 2001, and there was some additional observations or some additional support done from various sites around the world after that, although not by the University of Tasmania. However, in 2006, its operation stopped. Essentially, it wasn't put into safe mode when it passed through a particular part of its orbit and suffered some damage from which it never recovered. But its 33-year-long mission is the longest mission lifetime of any of the NASA Earth orbiting satellites. And down the bottom here, you can see a little image of some of the control software which one of my colleagues wrote for tracking IMP-8 back in the 1990s. And data from that satellite was used in more than 1,000 refereed scientific publications. So it was in quite a long orbit, so it moved relatively slowly throughout the sky. And the Mount Pleasant antenna had a special dipole antenna offset in order to be able to track it at a relatively low frequency. In the mid-1990s, the Japanese space agency JAXA launched the first radio telescope in space. So some of you will be aware that you can link radio telescopes together, very distant ones, to form an interferometric array, so-called very long baseline interferometry. And the VSOP or HALCA mission was essentially taking that idea to an extreme. So on the Earth, the longest baselines that we can essentially get are around about 12,000 kilometres. Essentially, that's as far apart as you will get two antennas which can see the same part of the sky simultaneously. and even that's only for a few minutes if they're that far apart. Now, obviously, if you put one of your antennas in orbit, you can get much longer baselines still, which for the case of interferometry means you can go to higher resolution. So the VSOP mission was an 8-meter radio telescope. Essentially, the antenna itself folded out once the satellite was launched into space. And you can see here, this is an image of the satellite when it was being tested prior to being launched. It essentially had a fine gold-coloured mesh surface, and it worked pretty well, although it did have some problems at its higher frequency. And the VSOP mission has enabled the highest angular resolution images ever made of astronomical sources. Oh, actually, sorry, I should say there's a Russian mission which has flown in the last few years, which has actually exceeded this recently. But for a long time, it was the highest angular resolution ever achieved. And the Mount Pleasant 26-meter and the antenna that we operate at SAA June, the 30-meter, participated in more than 100 of the experiments as part of a global array of ground telescopes, which observed in conjunction with the space-based radio telescope. Another mission that the University of Tasmania has played a role in, and one which is, was a herald of things to come, essentially, was back in 2005, the joint NASA-ESA Cassini-Huygens mission was at Saturn. And on the 14th of January 2005, the ESA-Huygens probe was deployed into the atmosphere of Saturn's largest moon, Titan. And the signal from the probe, which was being transmitted back to the Cassini main spacecraft to then be transmitted back to the DSN stations, was actually observed by an array of radio telescopes on the Earth and tracked as it descended into the atmosphere of Titan. So this experiment was not actually envisaged or was not actually planned when the mission was planned. As the Cassini spacecraft was being sent there, some people had the idea maybe we could do this. And so the signal that was being transmitted from the Huygens probe as it descended was never intended to be detected on the Earth. But by using large enough, sensitive enough radio telescopes, it was possible to actually detect it directly. And through that, measurements were made of the wind profile on Titan. And so the Huygens probe is the furthest object from the Earth where a human constructed object has ever landed. And as I said, we made measurements of the wind, or we were part of an international team that made measurements of the wind within Titan. And there are a number of missions that are now being planned or in progress, which are going to do similar things using very high resolution tracking in order to do planetary science. So one of those is the ESA JUICE mission, the Jupiter Icy Moons Explorer, which I believe is due to launch next year. And in about 2029 will arrive at Jupiter. And again, the University of Tasmania's antennas are part of the ground support network, which will be involved both in tracking the spacecraft along the way, but also in making some observations related to Jupiter's icy moons once it actually arrives there. A bit closer to home, we've also used our very high precision tracking using very long baseline interferometry to help measure the gravitational field of the moon. So this was work that we did in conjunction with, again, the Japanese space agency JAXA. So they launched a mission Selene or Kaguya in 2007, and it lasted about 2 years. And the Selene mission was interesting for a number of reasons, one of which was that in addition to the main probe, that was sent to the moon, there were 2 sub-probes included along with the Selene mission. They're labelled here on this diagram here as R star and V star. And these were 2 very small, very simple satellites, which were essentially used to do Doppler ranging and VLBI observations of the satellites as they orbited the moon. So one of the purposes of the Selene mission was to try and measure the gravitational field of the moon more accurately, and to do it on the far side of the moon. So because the moon only shows one face towards us at the Earth, we had a much poorer information of the gravitational field on the far side. And the reason for that is that the measurements of the gravitational field are essentially done by tracking a spacecraft in orbit, and the closer to the moon the spacecraft is, the more accurate the information on the gravitational field. But obviously, if you're in a low orbit around the moon, then there's a period of time when the spacecraft is behind the moon as viewed from the Earth. And so the geometry or the idea of the Selene mission was with these relay satellites and the VLBI satellite, essentially to be able to keep in constant communication with the spacecraft and therefore measure the orbital information when the satellite was otherwise behind the moon as seen from the Earth. And the purpose, again, of measuring the gravitational field was to investigate the composition of the moon and so test theories of the formation of the moon. So I think that many people want to know, what about the rockets? So let me move the rockets. So the Mount Pleasant 26-metre antenna was first used to support a rocket launch back in February 1999. And the mission that we supported was the launch of the Global Star satellites, telecommunication satellites, which the first of them was launched on a Soyuz rocket from Baikonur in Kazakhstan. Now, this mission has a particular significance to me for a number of reasons. Essentially, we were asked to support this mission with about 3 months' notice, and my job at the time was to take an antenna which was used solely for astronomy and to update the antenna control system so that it could track a low Earth orbit satellite, or these satellites soon after their launch. Now, of course, with space missions, you don't get to choose the date at which they occur. There are lots of other factors which determine that. And as chance would have it, the launch date for the Global Star mission fell on the due date for the birth of my first child. So as we were coming up to the launch date for the mission, I was working hard to get the last of the bugs out of our antenna control system, the new features of that. And I was also trying to train some of my colleagues so that in the event where I was off participating or being involved in the birth of my first child when the thing launched, that there were other people who could adequately do what needed to be done. Now, as it turned out, the rocket actually launched on the date it was supposed to, and the birth of my first child held off for a week after that. So I was able to actually enjoy both of those things. And my wife was certainly glad that I wasn't thinking about rockets and rocket launches at the time when our son arrived a week or so later. We've also supported launches from Cape Canaveral on a number of occasions, including launches from Boeing Delta, and we've worked with SpaceX on a number of missions. So I'm not allowed to say very much about our work with SpaceX. So there's some things in the public record of some of the missions we've supported, and I have some things like some mission patches, which I can show here just to demonstrate to you that we have indeed done some of the things that are reported, but I can't say too much more beyond that at the moment. So space is changing. In the time since I first became involved in tracking rockets more than 20 years ago now, space has moved from being largely for superpowers and aspiring superpowers and very large corporations with very big budgets to ones where now we have commercial operators who've reduced the cost of satellite launches. So SpaceX and other companies have done that. And it's also the situation that data being provided by spacecraft is increasingly economically important. And I think Australia is recognised as being one of the most space-dependent nations in the world because of our high usage of Earth observation and other data in our everyday lives and in a wide range of economic activities. So space is becoming rapidly more important for both commercial and strategic reasons. So when the Australian Space Agency was launched in 2018, or even before it was actually launched in 2018, we were talking to some of the people involved in the Space Agency and telling them about some of the work that we'd been involved with over the previous 20 years in terms of tracking and supporting missions. And we were fortunate enough in late 2019 to be awarded a grant from the Australian Space Agency under their Space Infrastructure Fund to construct a new antenna whose primary purpose is to track satellites and to support missions. So the antennas which I've talked about so far, our 26 metre and some of the other ones I'll mention in a moment, are predominantly used for astronomy. And they have very sensitive receivers on them, but because we're interested in astronomy, we tend to have, well, we don't have transmit capabilities on those antennas. Now, clearly, while tracking a satellite is interesting, while downloading data from a satellite is interesting, in some cases, you also want to be able to upload commands and check telemetry and do various things like that. And so you would like a transmit capability. It's also the case that while our antennas are generally relatively fast slewing for astronomical systems, low Earth orbit satellites move quickly. And it's nice to have an antenna which is designed specifically for tracking those faster moving low Earth objects. So the new antenna will be located at a place called Bisty Tir, or the Green Hill Observatory at Bisty Tir. That's the location where we have a 1.6 metre optical telescope, which is shown in the diagram here. And the new antenna will be located somewhere just off the picture down here. So this antenna is a 7.3 metre antenna, which will have up and downlink capability at S, X and KU bands. So that's 2, 8 and 12 gigahertz. And the antenna itself actually arrived in its containers last week. And so I've just put on the slide here an image of the container as it was about to be unpacked. So essentially, this is part of the antenna which sits just behind the backing structure over here and onto which the backing structure mounts. So we have some site work to do over the next few months, and we expect to be constructing and commissioning this antenna in early 2022. So in addition to our new antenna and the 26 metre, the University of Tasmania operates an array of 3 12 metre antennas in collaboration with Geoscience Australia. And this array of antennas plays a key role in Australia's position, navigation and timing infrastructure. So these antennas are located at 3 sites across Australia. So in addition to the 26 metre antenna in Hobart, we have a 12 metre antenna there. We have an identical 12 metre antenna on the campus of Charles Darwin University, just outside Katherine in the Northern Territory. We have another one at a place called Yarragadee or Minganoo, about 100 kilometres inland from Geraldton. And we also have a 30 metre antenna at June in South Australia, which we've operated since 1995, when it was donated to us by Telstra. So this antenna was previously used for supporting Intelsat satellites in the 1960s and 70s, and it was decommissioned in the 1990s, and Telstra was kind enough to donate it to us at that time. So we have an array of different, a range of antennas of different sizes, different sensitivities spread across Australia. Now, in addition to the astronomical and space geodesy work that we've used for those antennas, one of the things that the Australian Space Agency asked us to do was to develop a space domain awareness capability with the new tracking station. And in particular, they've asked us to use it as part of a bistatic radar system. So bistatic radar being where you transmit with one antenna, in this case a 7.3 metre antenna, and receive with another antenna, which will be our 26 metre antenna or our 12 metre antenna, which are located approximately 40 kilometres away. Now, we've been developing been working with people at the Deep Space Network on some related work, and I'll show you that in a moment. But we're also looking at how interplanetary space missions can be used to help predict space weather. So one of my colleagues, Gifra Malera, has used observations of things like Mars Express, the Juno mission, and other missions which are currently active and located around other planets, essentially to determine when a coronal mass ejection occurs. If the coronal mass ejection passes between our line of sight to the planet and the spacecraft, essentially you can use observations of the beacon from the spacecraft in order to determine properties of the plasma. And that's important, of course, because with space weather, the coronal mass ejections and things like that don't come straight from the sun to the Earth. The magnetic field gets in the way and plays a role in that. And nearly all of our information is basically based on Earth-based observations. And so having other lines of sight through the solar system helps. And this is a way in which you can sort of use missions which have a primary purpose which is completely different, but you can gain other pieces of information. So space domain awareness is an area of growing interest, not just in Australia, but globally. And Australia has a range of different specialized niche capabilities in space domain awareness. So many of you will be aware of the work done by groups like Silentium and EOS in passive and optical respectively. But in order to have a complete census, or to have a good suite of sensors which are able to cover all of the different things you might want to do in the space domain awareness space, requires different types of sensors. And bistatic radar is another one of those, another one of the tools in the toolbox. So the schematic here shows an experiment which was done back in March 2021. So some of you may remember in March 2021, there was a near-Earth object which passed about 2 million kilometres away from the Earth. And the Deep Space Network and the CSIRO antenna at the Australia Telescope Compact Array were used to try and make radar observations of that. Now, prior to that asteroid observation, they also did some other observations of slightly closer by objects, essentially to test the system and just to investigate the capabilities. And the University of Tasmania 12-metre antennas in Hobart and in Katherine were used as part of that experiment, which went alongside it. So the target for the test experiment was a part of an Atlas Centaur module, which was launched in 2015. So it's got the very exciting name 2015-056b. Essentially, it's a piece of space junk which is at about 30,000 kilometres, during the observations that we were involved with, it was at altitudes between, or distances between 30 and 39,000 kilometres. And the plot on the bottom here essentially shows the signal that was being received back at our antenna in Hobart after being transmitted from the Deep Space Network antenna. So the motion of the antenna on the Earth, the transmitting antenna and the receiving antenna, essentially we can model those well. We know what they are. We also have a prediction for the orbit of the piece of space debris. And so essentially the signal that was being transmitted from the Deep Space Network was corrected for all of those expected changes in velocity. So the velocity of the different stations and of the object itself. And so by looking at the change in the Doppler of the received signal, you can then pick up changes from those predictions in the orbit, assuming that you've got your station velocities and all those sort of things properly calculated. This plot down the bottom here shows several hours of observations, and the line here that's wiggling back and forth is because of the rotation of the rocket body, with a period of about 95 seconds in this particular case. So this shows changes in the velocity are being picked up here with a range of a few centimeters a second. It's about 15 centimeters a second change in velocity from the top to the bottom of that plot of the return signal that we can see here, which is pretty impressive when you consider that this is being measured at a distance of 30,000 kilometres. So your average police radar can't pick up changes in velocity that small at that sort of distance. So the antenna, the distance between the transmitting and receiving antennas in both cases was about 1,500 kilometres, in addition to the fact that the target itself was 30,000 kilometres away. So the University of Tasmania operates tracking antennas which have got a demonstrated capability to support a wide range of missions. So we can track objects in LEO, we can track objects and have the sensitivity to support missions in geostationary orbit. And as you've seen in some of the work I talked about with scientific missions earlier on, lunar, Mars orbit and beyond. The antennas cover frequencies from about 1 to 25 gigahertz. It varies depending on the specific antenna. They're all capable of operating at S and X bands, so 2 and 8 gigahertz, and all of them, with the exception of the Seduna antenna, can actually observe both of those simultaneously. For those of you with a more engineering bent, I've just put some specifications for the gain and the G on T values for the new antenna, or the predicted values for the new antenna, and the measured values for the 12 meter and the 26 meter antenna. All the 12 meter antennas essentially have the same parameters, and the Seduna 30 meter antenna is a little more sensitive even than the 26 meter antenna, slightly larger collecting area and slightly lower noise temperatures on some of the systems there. So what's in the future? So there are many opportunities for us to use the new ground station to advance the goals that have been set out by the Australian Space Agency, and to support and work with SMEs and other academic institutions on a variety of space missions. Now, one of the important things with space, of course, is that the events happen in a range of places. And, you know, a certain fraction of those events occur in locations where only Australian antennas can see them, that they're in our part of the sky. And an example of this is, I just pulled this from the Crew 2 demonstration mission last year. So this was the first SpaceX mission, which flew Bob and Doug to the International Space Station in July, August 2020. And what you can see here, this is from the SpaceX webcast. This orange section here of the final orbit of the Dragon spacecraft is where they did their deorbit burn. So when you're bringing your spacecraft down close to the US, which is what you tend to do if you're SpaceX, you do your deorbit burn in about this part of the orbit, about a third of the world away from the US coast, so as it's about to go across the Pacific Ocean. Now, of course, low Earth orbit, in some senses, is the easy stuff. You don't need a particularly big antenna for low Earth orbit, but to go further away, to go to lunar and Mars orbits and things like that, you do actually need large antennas. And in the Southern Hemisphere, there are relatively few large antennas. So the University of Tasmania is talking to a range of people, and I hope that in the not too distant future, we'll be able to say a little bit more about some of the opportunities that that appear likely to come to fruition over the next few years. So with that, I'll stop talking and take any questions that people might have.
Thanks, Simon. That was fascinating. I've got a few myself, and I'm sure there's a few here in the room. So, firstly, how is your child global star?
Yes. No, my that was never really in the equation.
It sounds to me like what you're doing there is like, do you have a full-time staff operating this network, or is it all students and graduates that are doing studies, or how does it work in that scenario?
So we have it's basically a range of things. So as a university setup, we operate on a much smaller staffing level than you know, we're not CSIRO, we're not the Deep Space Network or anything like that. In one sense, that's changing a little bit because the level of, I guess, the level of reliability, the level of service that we have to provide when we're doing astronomy and things like that is not the same as the level of service that, you know, when you're working with people commercially is required. So we're in the process, I guess. I'm working with our university to try and you know, move to a higher level of staffing and things like that in order to you know, take up some of these opportunities that are coming along.
I do have one correction for you, Simon, and you'll be pleased to hear this. The dish that was at Honeysuckle Creek was in fact moved down to Tidbinbilla and became the DSS 46 dish. I'm pretty certain. And in fact, Mike Din, who is actually on this Zoom site, was a former director of Honeysuckle Creek and then became the director at Tidbinbilla. You might want to pipe in and make some comments, Mike. You there? You have to unmute yourself if you want to say anything.
Yes, can you hear me, Peter?
Yes, we can.
Yes, the honeysuckle antenna, as you say, was dismantled and relocated to Tidbinbilla. And it supported tracking at Tidbinbilla for many years, from the early 80s well out into 2000. So the honeysuckle antenna wasn't really scrapped, it was relocated.
Oh, well, that's good to know. Well, I have to change my stories that I tell whenever I give tours now then. Okay.
Fantastic. Any other questions in the room here today? So obviously, we mentioned that you can't really talk about the arrangements with SpaceX. So obviously the university has commercial arrangements with SpaceX and other agencies and other operators around the world, is that correct? And that goes purely into the university's activities, or is there a profit arm that the Simon Ellingsen Retirement Fund that is?
So it's a bit of a mix. Obviously, we're predominantly we were set up as a research institution, and the astronomy and things like that we do are important. As astronomers, you don't necessarily often get a chance to work in an industrial sense and things like that. So the fact that we now have, a space industry within Australia, which is really sort of going places and taking off, is a new opportunity for us, which we so I'm putting on my hat here as a dean rather than as a, and it's important for us to sort of like engage with industry and work with them, as well as working on the scientific and academic problems. So there's areas of mutual benefit, and actually one of the things that is interesting, I've spoken to a few politicians recently, and I sort of pointed out to them that radio astronomy in Australia really was born out of the expertise of radar engineers who, at the end of the Second World War, had a lot of skills but didn't really, they were no longer required in military type work anymore. And now here we are sort of 70 years later, Australia's expertise in radio astronomy is now feeding back into some of the work we're doing in space, in this biostatic radar related work and things like that. So the improvements in technology, the improvements in techniques and digital signal processing, a lot of which are driven from an astronomy background, many of them can find applications in other places. So Australia's got a lot to offer in the broader space area, because we do have a lot of expertise which can then be applied in this sort of new area now that we have more opportunities to do that.
Fantastic. Any other questions in the room or online that would like to put a question?
Hello, Peter.
Yes, Charlie.
Yeah, g'day. So I obviously directed to Mr. Ellingsen. Please, sir, being slightly older than a lot of other people around the place, but knowing I'm the news on the scene, but during the space shuttle era, I believe there were two different missions, two projects, probably secondary projects, looking at the thinness of the ionosphere above Tasmania, and they involved the orientation of the space shuttle to actually do an engine blast to perforate a hole above Tasmania, which obviously had ramifications in the generation of the hole in the ozone layer, which ended up permeating and becoming bigger and bigger. Now, I'm wondering if Mr. Ellingsen and the University of Tasmania have been involved in any of the follow-up, and is there any other ongoing studies of this particular special feature down in Tassie, please?
So yeah, I'm aware of those experiments. So that was in 1986. One of the Challenger missions, I think, did that. But I think you're mixing two things up. The ionosphere and the ozone layer are completely different. They're not related.
Okay.
So the thinness of the ionosphere has nothing to do with the Antarctic ozone hole.
Right.
And the ionosphere, effectively, the thinness of the ionosphere over Tasmania is a natural phenomenon which relates to the Earth's magnetic field and the way in which the currents and things like that flow around the Earth. So the experiment which produced a hole or thinned the ionosphere over Tasmania, the result of that experiment were a little inconclusive. Martin George, in his PhD thesis and in some of the papers I mentioned earlier, sort of goes into more detail than I can recall off the top of my head as to what happened then. But essentially, that thinness of the ionosphere only lasted of a matter of hours. Right. Essentially, the ionosphere is replenished by the ionization from the sun. Mm-hmm. So it was a short-lived temporary phenomenon and unrelated to the ozone layer. So we haven't been responsible for causing any extra skin cancers that I'm aware of.
Thank you for that correction. I do apologise, but was the ramifications of the of that project or those projects, did they have an effect on the whole of the ozone layer itself? And then did it grow from there, and did it reverberate? And has the University of Tasmania had any sort of follow-up study of that, please?
So they looked at it at the time, and the results of the actual experiment were marginal. And no, they didn't. It didn't essentially expand or continue. It was essentially a very short-lived, very localized phenomenon. So, yeah.
Okay. So, do you get involved with ozone studies around Tasmania as such or not?
No, I'm not involved in any work on atmospheric physics at all.
Yeah. Okay. But yeah, that's Earth environment, and spacecraft and such things would always be very useful, right? When you throw in polar vortexes, I'm already lost. Right? So it's phenomenal. Thank you for that.
Thanks, Charlie. Thank you very much. Actually, we're running out of time, so thank you so much, Simon. That was really fascinating and amazing amount of work that you're doing there and continue to do. And I think it follows on quite nicely to the earlier presentation. I'm not sure whether you joined us earlier with the Andy Thomas Foundation and their work to try and expand the skills and operations of the space industry. So what you're doing is quite phenomenal. I had no idea when I first stumbled across a little bit of what you do there. So thank you so much for joining us tonight. We had a couple of hiccups on the line, but overall it was fantastic. So Simon, you're more than welcome to stay on board for the rest of tonight's presentation with Space News and Planetary News. But once again, thank you, Simon, and we'll put our hands together. Thank you.
Well, thank you for having me. And if anyone does have any further questions that crop up, you can always find my email address. It's just my name @utas.edu.au. So that will always get to me. So thank you. And yeah, I caught the end of the presentation or the end of the discussion before, and it's very true. Getting suitably qualified people is getting harder and harder. So it's an area where we certainly need to be training and inspiring more people to work in and skill up. So yeah, thank you for listening.
Pleasure. As Michael might have mentioned, this entire evening being recorded and will be up on our YouTube channel. So if you wish to go back and look at your presentation and the other presentations at your leisure, please go ahead and do so. Just go to our website and find the links in there. For the people back here and anywhere else, we're going to take a break for a little while now. I think we have to break, so we're playing a little bit late, right? We'll just do a 5-minute break, go and get a drink, bathroom break, etc., and we'll be back here with Global Space News. Thanks, everyone. Just a bit of housekeeping. Please make sure you have scanned in with the big services QR code there. It's at the back of the room and downstairs. And also, with the restrictions now, you do have to wear your mask if you're not eating and drinking. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you back here in 5 minutes.
Okay. And
I think it's that one woman who went to Sydney for a holiday, the physiotherapist.
oh,
That's what triggered ours.
okay.
So,
Okay. Catch you after.
all right, Ash. No
Ta.
worries.
Oh, really? Ready? You ready to go? Can you hear me? Testing. Whoa. That's right. This is very loud. Excellent. All right. What's the time? It's 9 o'clock. So we don't have a long time. Can we get everyone back in their seats? All right. Okay, let's get started. Welcome everyone, and this is a bit of a bit more than I could chew here. I've gone from March to June because I haven't done one of these since then. So it's not as polished as it could have been. I just ran out of time, but we'll see how we go. Australian space, quick roundup. A site in North Queensland could host launches for an Australian company. Queensland government officials supported development of the launch site at the Abbott Point. Gilmore Space, which is developing a small launcher, said it was interested in this and it would be a valuable asset. Gilmore Space is due to launch next year. So there it is. There's his Eris rocket, and Abbott Point is just, where is it? It's south of Cairns, but north of Rockhampton. So,
Angela, I showed this last month.
sorry?
I showed all this last month.
Did you? All right. Oops, sorry. Gilmore Space. I'm not actually sure what you showed tonight either, so because I wasn't here. So let's just see. Two companies are moving ahead to provide Internet of Things. Mariota was spoken about, and they've actually trying to sell their wares in US and Canada. So that's a good thing. And they're really into nano satellites with fleet, of course. And there's a European Space Agency. You're going to build a second dish for deep space communications in Australia. And it's just north of Perth. Moving on. Air Force, the Australian military has actually selected its first commander responsible for space activities. Have you done all this? Yeah, okay. Now, Australia's military plans to spend several $1 billion over the next decade on new space division. That's actually a lot of money, so I thought I'd mention it. Not that I want to militarise the talk, but it certainly is a lot of money that will be going to Australian space. All right, moving on. The Australian military, so, okay, there we have it. Moving on. 10 companies in the United States will join the 21 class of Space Business Accelerator. Techstar Space Accelerator launched in 2021, and one of them is a Sydney-based company called NixLab, and is a specialist in remote control of scientific instruments in space. Whilst some firms are squarely focused on the space sectors, others are not, and they work together in these accelerators. ANU is still looking at this, reaching up to Centauri one day. So they're still doing studies on that, which I found quite interesting. scientists from the ANU are working on a new project propulsion system based on utilising space lasers. It comes out of the work that Stephen Hawking did, or was promoting with Yuri Milner. It's unveiled the Breakthrough Starshot program as part of this Breakthroughs initiative. So it was interesting that that work still continues. They put in $100 million to research this stuff. So it'd be fantastic. And the idea was to fly spacecraft to 20% the speed of light. So, you know, we could reach Elvis Centauri, do the maths, probably in about 30 years or something. Be fantastic if we could see it in our lifetime, but we can only hope. Australian Space Agency, the Australian government has issued the first launch site licence in South Australia. You probably said this last time, yeah. And this is Southern Launch, and these are really suborbital flights that have been approved, but they're looking for the orbital ones. The university ANU was awarded $2.5 million grant to establish a network of infrastructure for space testing facilities. Did you bring this one up, Peter? It's about providing qualification testing for hardware of your product. One of them is example, the heavy ion accelerator, allowing components tested for space, such as computers and other devices, to be tested against extreme radiation. And the other one is really testing space-focused pyroshock, things that happen when you eject payloads, usually with quite severe G-forces. So we're establishing home ground facilities to test such things, which is good. Now to New Zealand, Rocket Lab. Rocket Lab successfully launched 6 satellites in March, and a second demonstration of its Photon satellite bus. The satellites on the mission included Internet of Things satellite for Fleet and Mariana. After the satellite deployment, the Photon satellite bus was tested, and that's what it looks like. An Electron rocket failed to reach orbit in May. It was the second failure in less than a year for the small launch vehicle, which was doesn't give it a good track record over a year. An Electron launched last July failed because of electrical problems with the upper stage. The rocket's first stage performed as expected, but the single engine on the upper stage appeared to shut down seconds after ignition. The rocket was carrying 2 imaging satellites for Black Sky. There's Peter Beck, who vowed to fix the problem and return as quickly as possible. Initial reviews suggest an issue of some kind with the second stage engine, and it triggered a shutdown command. It's interesting, one of the videos you'll see that not long after the stage separated, it started to spin around, and the computers shut the thing down. Apparently they've been able to replicate in ground tests, but the problem is that multiple failure events have to occur for it to happen, so they're still investigating it. FAA authorisation has been received, however, to resume launches, so that's good under its existing licence. The rocket's first stage was actually recovered, splashed down and was recovered, and it's part of Rocket Lab's intentions to recover their rocket. A NASA-backed Mars small-sat mission may get a second chance to fly by working with Rocket Lab. So the Escapade mission, love how they do that, was to launch next year, but it was bumped from its rideshare slot because the Psyche mission, which was part of the rideshare, changed its launch vehicle. So Rocket Lab have been working with them, and Escapade is sponsored by the University of California in Berkeley to hopefully utilise the Photon satellite bus with the Mars probe on another rocket. The only other rocket going around at the moment is the Atlas or the Falcon. Under that approach, the mission would launch in 2024 on a NASA-provided vehicle. Oops, I missed that. Okay, so it's still not definite, but they're still reviewing it, and so they can go on the next phase of development. There it is. Small satellite. Rocket Lab, a New Zealand startup working on a new kind of solar array, has raised a seed round and won support from Rocket Lab. Astronautics, they raised $500,000 to support their lightweight solar array. What impressed me about this was that these are very young people who are starting these companies, and so sorry. Should be 460,000. Is it that much? Okay, so Rocket Lab allowed them to use Rocket Lab allowed them to use the vacuum chamber in the factory, so that was good of them. But it's good to see the young people, starting to get involved. It's great to see. The New Zealand's Green Party wants to stop Rocket Lab from launching military payloads from the country. So he recently introduced a bill, and he said the government has a responsibility not to help other countries wage wars. So I don't think I had the other bit on that, but Rocket Lab have said, look, we've not launched any weapons we've launched military reconnaissance satellites and stuff, but we certainly haven't launched any weapons into space. So be interested to see how that goes. This is the Neutron. We spoke about that one time before, but the Rocket Lab are aggressively developing that for launch probably in 2024, and it is a fully reusable vehicle. So good on them. The New Zealanders are doing really well. NASA. We've got Bill Nelson was sworn in as administrator. He had widespread support. He's a public servant. I mean, that's really what he is. He's a former US senator from Florida, and he did fly the space shuttle at one time, but he's got the connections, and hence no resistance really from either the Republicans or the Democrats to put him in. And I was a bit dubious about his appointment, but he seems to be doing all right, seems to be saying the right things. And sorry, there's two, absolutely, Bolden and Nelson.
And George Harrison as well.
And George Harrison. Deputy Administrator. Well, Pamela Melrose was sworn in as the new NASA Administrator as well. She's a retired colonel from the US Air Force, NASA astronaut, and a space shuttle commander. In fact, commander twice. Pam is only two women to have commanded the space shuttle. She was an independent consultant and had an Australian connection. She actually helped establish the Australian Space Agency and was a consultant to various other groups. So, good on her. We've got a direct connection. And whilst I was looking at Twitter the other day, when she got appointed, the head of the Australian Space Agency actually sent her nice to hear, and she responded, which was great. So we've got a one-on-one connection there. She also joined Nano Satellite Marietta as a board member at some point. The other thing is the National Space Council hasn't got dumped. The Biden administration will retain it, at least in some form. Details have been worked on. Industry groups had lobbied to keep it. They found it useful under the last administration, which was Mike Pence, who was the chairman of the group. So that was good. And Kamala Harris will chair the council, who is vice president as well. Don't know what she knows about space, but be interesting to find out. Hopefully she can ask the right questions. Budget. The White House is proposing a budget increase of more than 6% for fiscal year 2022, which means it goes to October. Their fiscal year ends in October. A budget outline recently released offered $24.8 billion, $1.5 billion more than 2021 for NASA in 2022, with significant increase in Earth science and space technology. NASA's human space exploration would get a 5% increase, but didn't discuss how the funding would be allocated amongst various programs as part of Artemis, and didn't really provide a definitive schedule. It did include $1.2 billion for the Human Landing System program, a funding level that assumes NASA continues with single option A, i.e. SpaceX, and contract awardee SpaceX. But it does keep the agency on track for now to return humans to the moon, 2024. So NASA is still pushing hard. Won't happen in 2024, but you know, if 25 or 26, that's still not a bad effort. Will still be earlier than 2028, which was being proposed, say, 6 years ago. Requests a record $7.9 billion for science. So Earth sciences get a real big kick here because you know the Democrats are big on climate change and Earth sciences. The budget, though, again proposed the cancellation of SOFIA, which is the Airborne Observatory, the 747. But again, that's the one that you use as a sacrificial lamb. Congress says you can't do that, and they'll just refund, put some money in, and it'll be on again. It's pretty old, but they still, you know, it's still good science. A full budget proposal is expected later this year. Space direction. NASA Administrator Bill Nelson offered Congress a wish list of projects with more than $10 billion the agency would like to see. They were seeking $5.4 billion proposed infrastructure upgrades, which was interesting. So, you know, a lot of the Kennedy Space Center is slowly starting to turn to rust. So there is quite a need. And there was talk about funding the refurbishment of NASA facilities via other budget proposals, not within the NASA appropriation. So that was interesting. He also requested another $5.4 billion for infrastructure improvements at NASA centres, $585 million for a nuclear thermal proposal, and $200 million for spacesuits for Artemis. Nuclear propulsion. Yeah, the revised version of it. They're getting serious about nuclear propulsion, the Americans. Human landing system. We spoke about that at the last meeting, so I won't go into it. But Senate passed a bill on Tuesday. This is later information with the controversial lunar lander provision. So the Senate approved on a 68 to 32 vote a US Innovation Competitive Act. That was really based on America trying to be competitive with China. That's what it was really about. But some of the senators threw a couple of NASA components in there. Yeah, here we go. We're alive again. Okay. Weird harmonics. Weird.
So is this related to the Blue Origin and the other mob challenging the decision?
It is. It is. It includes an Authorization Act with a provision directing NASA to select at least 2 companies for human landing program, and authorising $10 billion over the next 5 years. In other words, what? Let me go. It was this senator here. It was sponsored by Senator Maria Cantwell, Democrats Washington, same state where Blue Origin and Boeing reside. So she was proposing, yeah, it's a coincidence. I've got a few more coincidences here as well. But so that actually got approved by the Senate. It'll go to the House and it'll get thrown out, of course. The reality is NASA won't get an extra $10 billion over 5 years to fund too. NASA would like to do it. Nelson has basically said, look, I support this, but we need more money. Give me the 10 billion. And that was NASA's ploy all along. Award to SpaceX, make some controversy, force Congress to provide.
The 68-32 was all 50 Democrats, or was it split?
I don't know the split. That's an interesting point. I should look it up. That provision attracted criticism for some who called it a bailout for Blue Origin. And there's a little man called Bernie Sanders, who you might know in America, who's really got a campaign against the billionaires, as he calls them. In particular, Jeff Bezos. He's saying, why the heck are we giving them $10 billion, you know, to do something when they actually lost the bid? Again, the final version of the bill includes some changes, like ensuring the existing HLS award to SpaceX remains. So in the final outcome, there was no inference of going back to tender for the HLS, which means we don't lose a lot of time, but we've lost time up front already, and I'll get to that in a sec. I applauded the Senate's passage of the bill and look forward to working with the House to see it pass into law. And this is Bill Nelson. Again, he'd love to see two proposals. He just wants the money. Nothing wrong with that. Another part of the bill, sponsored by Senator Roger Wicker, Republican Mississippi, would like to see the SLS core stage continually being tested at Stennis. NASA says it doesn't need to do this. It's done its green run test. We've done it, dusted. But this guy goes back to the good old days when they used to test shuttle main engines at Stennis. See, Stennis has got nothing to do now. So it's in his state. So
didn't they always used to test by the Saturn V boosters as well before they?
Yeah, that's where they did it all. But now the engines for the SLS don't have to be continually retested. You see, they've done their testing, and he's worried that Stennis Space Centre will sit there with nothing to do, and he's probably right. But again, he's put that in the bill.
Yeah, those engines are only tested once.
Yeah.
Whereas the shuttle engines would recycle.
NASA's administrator, Bill Nelson, asked Senate appropriations for more funding. Nelson defended NASA's decision to select one, which was SpaceX. He revealed, and this was important, that Dynetics made up the highest bid, proposing 8.5 to 9 billion for its lander. SpaceX, they've awarded a contract for 3 billion, rounded off, 2.9, $3 billion. So Dynetics was 8.5 to 9. I believe that the national team, i.e. Blue Origin and Boeing and the rest, they were in the $5 billion mark. So SpaceX was pretty much half, hence NASA's decision. And technically, they actually won the technical assessment. So it wasn't given to SpaceX on a plate. He told the senators that with additional funding, NASA would be able to add a second company. We'll need to go to the House, and it's unlikely to be passed in any case. So we're stuck probably with one lunar lander. And remember, the contract is only for a landing on the moon, test flight, and a manned landing. There is a further option B, a tender to go out for regular lunar landings beyond the first. This is really just to get first on the moon.
Or within 30 meters of the moon.
A new report lays out 30-year space strategy for the United States. What was interesting here was it recommends that the 1967 Space Treaty get really revised to fit in with current, space resources and space mining and all the rest of it. So that's an interesting thing. That pressure will start to build over the next few years. They also call on a coalition to push back on Russian Chinese testing and deployment of anti-satellite weapons. A bill to be introduced in the House would classify space as critical infrastructure. I thought that was interesting. Moving on, the House Science Committee is asking the GAO, or the Government Accounting Office, to investigate NASA cybersecurity. They had some breach not so long ago, and after the oil thing they had, where they had cyber attacks, and there were a couple of others. Americans are getting very sensitive to cyber attacks, and I think they're really going to start to put some money into it. Also getting a bit of attention is...
And the networks.
Yes.
And they paid them off. They paid the millions of ransom.
They did?
That was a mistake.
Well, I tell you what, when you're in that position. The other big topic that's coming up is space debris. And in particular, if you look at the amount of satellites that are being proposed to be put up there, even the Chinese are now talking thousands of satellites for their system, it's going to be a real issue. Now, SpaceX have actually lowered their orbits. Again, that means that over time they will just re-enter the atmosphere and not create this real issue of space objects, but they're becoming a real problem. Considerable discussion continued about Russia and China, space capabilities and intentions. That's just really grown. Look, new reports describe growing efforts by China and Russia to develop counter space capabilities. So the Americans are becoming, one could say paranoid, but they have a right to be, because there's no question that the Russians and Chinese have been playing this game for a lot of years. The new report projects by 2040, which is China's stated objective, China will be the significant rival to the United States in space. The head of the US Space Command described China as the pacing threat for US military. I suspect that's what's allowing some of the NASA budget creep and the Space Force budget creeps and the US Air Force creeps to actually be committed by the United States.
Should we call it creep?
No, call it what you like. Some space experts criticise some of the recent reports by US intelligence, and they're saying, look, you're painting China with a broad brush, right? But they're not drawing attention to their peaceful uses of space, like their space station. All right, I've run out of time, but very quickly, we know that we had this last time. Lumley died, Collins died. We've had Mark Geyer. I don't know if you know him from Johnson Space Centre, but he's one of the good guys there, but he's actually had to resign because of cancer. So it's not good to lose people like that. We've had Steve Jerzik has now been replaced by Bob Cavana. Bob Cavana was running Kennedy Space Centre. He's now the Associate Administrator of NASA. Both good guys, so very capable. It's a shame to lose Steve. NASA outlines its plans to support development of space commercial space stations. I won't go into that. A NASA report estimates the COVID-19 pandemic will cost the agency $3 billion, maybe more, not over yet. And again, we spoke about the climate change. Cost of schedule overruns. They've continued more than 1.1 billion, and you can guess where that's coming from. Clearly the SLS and exploration ground system. Bill Nelson and Russian counterparts have held an agreement, held talks to agree, and have agreed to talk some more. What that's about is the Russians have said, we're pulling out of the ISS. Unless you get rid of some of the sanctions that are on Russia, then maybe we'll reconsider. But the Russians have made no, they've been really quite direct. They want to get out of the space station so that they can focus with their new friends in China. So that's interesting. They're still talking. I think this is who blinks first, but if the Americans are a little bit easier with the Russians will stay on board. I've really run out of time. CRS-22 was launched. It carried in its boot, it carried 2 new solar arrays for the space station, which we can talk about right now. So the space station, Soyuz rocket, delivered a new crew during the time, and came back. I'm going to rush through some of this now. Russia's Deputy Prime Minister suggested the country could pull out of the ISS, as I said, as soon as 2024 and leave by 2025. The robotic arm apparently got hit by some debris. Still working though. Demand for private astronaut missions to the ISS is exceedingly available. There's Axiom Space is one that you'll know. They've got 1 planned, 2, 3 more. They've got at least 1 spot going with NASA, but apparently you can only have two flights a year or something. So it's very limited to what you can actually do. So,
Tommy Cruise going?
haven't heard actually. Russian cosmonauts may routinely spend a year in the ISS going forward, rather than 6 months that they seem to have been doing. So they're going to spend more time. What is the real reason why they're doing this?
Possession is 9/10 of the law.
By the way, they're going to be sending a film producer and an actress to the space station, the Russians. It's good paying trips to the space station. So one of the reasons why one of the astronauts might have to spend a year there to relinquish some of the seats. Now, some cosmonauts recently completed a spacewalk to really start looking at detaching one of the modules that's currently on the space station for the replacement that's coming up shortly. And there it is. The Piers airlock module was disconnected, and the Norca multi-purpose module is getting ready to launch to the space station.
So that's interesting. What do they do with it? Any plans to deorbit it?
Haven't heard, but they will. And they would do a controlled deorbit burn, I suspect. But also, NASA have recently done spacewalks, and they actually installed the. Now, if you can have a look at this, in the boot of the Dragon, cargo Dragon, are 2 sets of arrays, and they come together, they unfold like this, and then they just boom. They're the same. They're made by Boeing. They're the same solar panels that'll be used on the Lunar Gateway, interestingly enough. And hopefully we can see them unfurl. There they go. I don't know how they keep them straight. Something to do with space. They go out straight. I would have thought they'd go out and curl up on themselves or something.
Or maybe like the arms on each side, they seem to be like tennis balls.
It's bizarre. I reckon the roller at the top rolls. It's got a motor and it rolls. Anyway, it's weird. They've got it.
We used to have those as kids.
I know, but they will also go like that.
No, they went straight out and come straight away like that.
No, love to see the physics on that. All right, moving on. Commercial crew. I'll just finish this. I'm 4 minutes over. Starliner. Bottom line is they're going to do at the end of July. They're going to fly orbital flight test number 2, which is a repeat of what really went bad a year and a half ago. If it works, it means that by the end of the year, they may send crew up there, the test crew, and then operational missions will occur next year, which means the US will have 2 mechanisms for getting to space. NASA, all right, July, I won't go into that. I am out of time. I just wanted to do SpaceX. What are they doing? SpaceX? Well, I'm not going to keep this table up because they've done it all. They've had Crew 2 go up there, and Crew 3 has been organised. They had a seat for the Russian. They were waiting for the Russians to take a seat on one of these because they wanted to have a mutual agreement on using each other's spacecraft in case one country loses access to space, but they haven't been able to cut a deal. So Crew 1 came back. Yeah, Crew 1, Crew 2's up there now, and that's it. I'm going to stop. Excellent. And I didn't even get to SpaceX.
That's excellent.
I got the pictures though, if you want.
We'll finish the presentation in a couple. Well, thanks everyone. It's thinned out tonight, but great night tonight. Thank you for anyone who's still online and our speakers particularly who may or may not be still online. It was a great night actually. I thought it worked out really well having the ability to bring in speakers from outside of Melbourne via Zoom really opens up our opportunities to get people involved. So if you have people you know or think you might know or interested in an area that you think would be good for the group, let us know and we'll try to chase them down. So thanks, Angelo. And Andrew, I think you did prepare some stuff tonight, but you were willing to cede to Angelo. So thanks for doing that anyway. And thank you for Simon and the other 2 gentlemen, Michael and Nicola, if you're there. Next meeting, 28th of July, I think it is. So a couple of days before the Starliner flight, 26th. So thanks for that, and we'll see you next month. We're going to do a social YouTube, Zoom thing this Saturday night from 8 p.m. So basically it's no presentations, it's just all of us space geeks jump on, have a chat about what's going on. We did an experimental one a couple of weeks ago. That was actually quite good. So so we'll be sending out email with all the links to that, and come along and join and bring anyone else you want to bring along. And yeah, okay, thanks, good night. Yeah, sorry.
You mentioned that Salyut 7, the movie, is on Prime Video.
The Salyut 7 movie is on Prime Video now.
No, it's all in Russian. It does have subtitles. Well, for those of us who don't know.
Fantastic.
Right, yeah.
Brilliant. Okay, thanks, and thanks Ashley for your work once again, putting all the technical stuff together. Appreciate it so much.